trying to pin down, like, why does everybody have to have a diagnosis? Sometimes life sucks. And that would be my diagnosis. Life really sucks. Sometimes it's hard. It's not easy. Things don't go according to plan. People are not loving and trustworthy all the time. You don't have a clinical diagnosis. You have something called life happens.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Rebecca Smith, who's a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and I'm ready for a great conversation. So, Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, start off, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what's your background?
So, my name's Rebecca Smith, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been licensed for almost 20 years, I guess 20 years this year. I have a private practice here in my county. It's pretty large. We have contracts with the courts, and I have about 25 counselors that work for me. I have a nonprofit that focuses on children in foster care that reside in orphanages, modern day orphanages, and the homeless from 18 and up. And I volunteer on multiple boards and am very big on giving back to the community.
That's very cool. There's so much good stuff there. What initially motivated you to go to the therapy route?
Well, that is a great question. I originally wanted to be an educator. My mom's a retired teacher, and I've always loved working with children. And I still say that children are the thread that stitches my heart together. I'll do anything for kids. But I definitely wanted to have more of that one-on-one relationship opportunity and find other ways to advocate for them. Originally, what got me into working with a specialized population was to work with kids with disabilities. And so I just kind of meandered my way through. I started working for the state with profound mental illness, and then I ended up working at the Harris County Jail, which is the third largest county jail in America. And then I started my private practice, and here we are.
Wow, that's cool. That's really neat. So, what you've been in practice for 20 years, you said. How have you seen the field evolve over that time?
Oh, man. So, I graduated with my master's in 2004, and I've had over 250 counselor interns come through my practice to train over the years since I became a supervisor. And in probably about 2018, I started hearing this rhetoric that was very unusual. And so I asked all of my counselors to provide a list of their textbooks. And so I bought a few of them and started going through what they were reviewing in their courses. And in doing that, I'm reading things that I'd never heard of before. And so I just kept doing more research. And then all of a sudden, this cult for gender ideology erupts, and I'm seeing children become the center of their target area, and it was very frustrating. So watching this transgender ideology really come to fruition and the queer culture taking over, it's been very disturbing to see where the mental health field has veered off to. And I'm prayerful that we're going to manage to at some point get it back to a bit more of a normal course. Of course, I think it's kind of funny to talk about mental health being normal because
Uh-huh.
we're in this field for the abnormal. The normal don't usually seek out mental health services. I would say it was probably the 2018, give or take. And then in 2020, 2021 is where it just really just exploded.
Yeah, you said, we're not in a normal field, and it seems like if it's a diagnosis of like severe bipolar or schizophrenia, we would say, "Hey, this is something off. We need to figure out how to correct it." But with the gender identity thing, it says, "No, no, this is good. It's how it's supposed to be." It seems like we're supposed to glorify that. Is that what you notice?
That yes, the affirmative therapy approach. Like I have a sign over my chair at my office that says, "You find comfort among those who agree with you, growth among those who don't." And that's really been one of the phrases that I impose on all of my counselors. because we're here to challenge you. We're not here to agree with you. Your best friend agrees with you. Your best friend joins you in whatever emotion you have. Mental health professionals are supposed to challenge these ideas or beliefs or whatever it is that you have going on so that we can help you grow and gain insight into who you are and really try to understand where are these behaviors coming from? How is it benefiting me? And how do I get to a place where I feel better about who I am and what I'm doing? Maybe even having some congruency of who am I and how am I behaving to be congruent with what I believe I am.
That's interesting. I forget what year. Would you say 2018 was when you started seeing a lot of this stuff?
That's right. Yeah, 2018. And the earliest textbook I've been able to find is around 2015 for publication.
Yeah. What was some of the stuff that you initially saw that you thought, something's off here?
It all goes to the transgender nonconforming. So my specialty is working with families that are in high conflict divorce or custody modification. And so I hone in on the alienating behaviors. I have children that have become alienated or estranged from their one of their biological parents. And so helping them to reunify, helping the co-parents to learn how to be divorced in the healthiest possible way. That's my specialty. And so when I looking at this transgender nonconforming information in these textbooks, and it's talking about coaching the parents to accept whatever the self-diagnosis is of these children, these minors, and that phrase that we've all heard, would you rather a live daughter or a dead son? I'm just thinking, my goodness, the alienating behaviors that are going on within our field against the family of origin, and then telling these kids that they're not in a safe space, that their parents don't accept them. But children are not supposed to be diagnosing themselves. And why are we just accepting their self diagnosis of transgender? And then telling the parents that they have to conform as well and affirm.
Yeah, it just seems so bizarre to me as well. You said you're seeing this in like your new counselor interns. What kind of ideas were they being trained with in school?
It's the same. It's that affirmative therapy approach. Everything is affirm, affirm, affirm. And so when I first started hearing this, I would challenge them. Really, I would step outside of transgender and I would just focus on a profound mental illness like bipolar with psychotic features or schizophrenia with psychotic features. And if you hear somebody talking about, for example, many years ago, I had a client that believed the TV was telling him to do certain things. And so he was having active psychosis and it was with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so he engaged in what the TV he believed was telling him to do. And he was missing for about a week. And long story short, they found him barefoot in downtown Houston and all the things. So if I have a client like this sitting in my office and I affirm what he is believing to hear, whether it's from the TV or voices, wherever. If I affirm this, what's going to happen? Because what if it's telling the person to kill somebody? So why would we affirm? And everybody agrees, you don't affirm, you don't affirm. But then also, you can't just argue it. I can't say, you're not hearing that, because that session's going to turn into a battle back and forth of who's right and wrong. And who am I to say he's not hearing those voices? And so instead, we have to explore what's going on and use logic to process through all of this. And the counselors are engaged in these great conversations. And then at the end, I say, okay, now I'm going to shift topics just a little bit. Same idea on how to treat this, but you have an 8-year-old coming into your office that's a boy claiming to be a girl with a self-diagnosis of transgender, a trans woman or trans girl. And how do you manage that? And really what I found, even though the educational institutions are pushing this ideology with affirmative therapy, the counselors at my practice were unsure of how to respond to that. And they were very uncomfortable because they knew that there was a conflict there. They just didn't know how to breach that information. So I really work with them to get comfortable with this topic because it's going to be more and more prevalent as the years pass. And so it has. But these are therapists that are going into a field that they were very moderate, not necessarily left or right leaning. They're just walk in the middle of the road. And then they found themselves in this very liberal, progressive ideology. And they knew something wasn't right because no one should be pushing anything like this on children. Well, no one should be pushing this, period, but especially on children because they're so easily influenced. And so I've been very lucky that I'm able to kind of pull them out of the depths of that. And what we're seeing is that the far left progressive ideology is pushing all of the moderate counselors to be conservative or right leaning, which is a good thing.
Mm. I don't know what it is about this trans issue that feels like it's in such a different category than everything else. Because if you had an 80-pound anorexic come to you and say, I'm obese, no one would say you're supposed to affirm that. If you have someone who's severely depressed who says, my life's not worth living, I should take my life, no one would say you should affirm that. But for some reason, if a man comes to you and says, I believe I'm a woman, that's in like this higher category that's like holy and sacred that you're not allowed to disagree with. Like, why is that in such a different category than other diagnoses?
My personal belief and opinion is that this is very pharma led. There is so much money. I mean, we've got Planned Parenthood now has 450 locations across the country prescribing hormone replacement therapy and puberty blockers. This is a huge moneymaker. Mental health professionals are getting into this. And if you search mental health professionals, I mean, there are studies that say approximately 90% of mental health is woke. Well, they don't say it like that. They say it's liberal. And we know, well, there's even somebody from Planned Parenthood that said this is a cash cow. Minors that are transgender are cash cows because they have to maintain their appointments. They have to be coming back. So there is just, I mean, it's just a huge moneymaker. This particular niche is a huge moneymaker for medical and mental health, and it's disgusting. I think 2019 to 2023 or 2022, something like that. It was over $120 million in profit that they made off of minors transitioning.
Gosh, that's so disturbing. I don't know if you're familiar with the WPATH files, but so many of these top researchers and top advocates for transitioning minors knew the entire time what harm it was causing, and they still pushed it and they suppressed a lot of that evidence. Are you seeing anything change in the field where people are like, I don't know if this is the right way to go, or are people just sticking to their guns?
I have found that most of the liberal, far left, progressive mental health professionals are just sticking to their guns. I've been kicked out of every single social media platform that's related to mental health. I've gotten letters, death threats. Friends that I've known for 20 plus years have cut me out. They are adamant that this is true and accurate. And I'm even getting things like, why do you have a problem with the gay and lesbian community? I thought you were my friend and you were supportive. I'm like, I've never had a problem with that. And I'm still supportive. I want for you to be happy, whatever makes you happy. What I am against is mutilating children and chemically castrating children or pushing an ideology for social transitioning on children because it's wrong. But they don't see it that way. They just don't see it that way.
Yeah, it's such a like a bizarre slippery slope because it starts out, kind of the LGBTQ all in one umbrella for some reason, and then it starts out, well, you shouldn't harass people for being gay. Okay, I agree with that. And then for some reason, like before you even realize it, we need to be running medical experiments on children. How do we get there?
Right. Well, and I think that's why you've seen this great divide within the LGB community, where it's the LGB and then the TQ plus.
Yeah, definitely. You talked about, I think it was 90% of the mental health field is left leaning. I've heard stuff like therapists say, I would never treat a Trump supporter. Counseling professors say our goal is not to help you treat Trump supporters. Conservatives generally, but especially Trump supporters, just seem like something icky to a lot of the therapy profession. Like, this population is not worthy of our time and attention. Are you seeing any of that?
Gosh, yes. Yeah. Before I was kicked out of the forums on social media, there was a whole lot of that. And I took screenshots and posted them talking about these are the people that are treating your children because they're groomers. These are groomers that we are sending our greatest blessings to work with in private. At this point, I don't even have my counselors, unless it's court ordered, working with small minor children without the parents because what are we able to accomplish with a minor child if we're seeing them every single week for 1 hour and then we're sending them right back into their home with their parents and we've done nothing to help their parents understand what we're working on with their children? So At this point, we work with small children and their parents unless we're court ordered to do otherwise, for example, with my high conflict divorce stuff. But we have to train the parents. And in fact, for years and years now, when lawyers call and say, Rebecca, little Johnny and little Susie, they're so precious, they're 6 and 8, their parents are going through this awful divorce, and we're just really worried about Johnny and Susie. I say, as much as I would love to work with Johnny and Susie, because again, they are the thread that stitches my heart together, it's not them that needs the work, it's the parents. Parents have to figure out how to navigate this in order to help the children, because however we respond, as big or small as that might be, is going to be how our children respond. And one of the stories that I use to really explain this, when my boys, I have 2 boys, when they were about 1.5 and 3.5, give or take, we were up in the Huntsville area, which is here in Texas, not far from where we live. There are no bears in our area, none, but we're camping. We have a little pop up, and I took them to meet my parents. And my dad, we love to scare each other. We've done it for generations, right? And so my dad's outside and it's starting to get dark, and he's just kind of lightly tapping on the canvas part of the trailer that they're camping in and growling like a bear. Well, my boys are really small, and so you could see that, and this is all split seconds. You could see the panic in their eyes, and they're like, my goodness. And my mom and I are just about to fall out of our seats cracking up. And so as soon as my boys do that, they turn and they look at my mom and me and see that we're laughing. And then it's like everything registers in their head, and they realize, Granddad's not here. That must be Granddad on the other side acting like a bear. If we had responded with the same fear, we would have exacerbated the fear that they were experiencing in that split second, believing that there was a bear on the other side of the camper. But because they saw our reaction in a completely different way, laughing, they responded with giggles as well. So children are going to respond as big or small as their parents respond. And it's really critical that we teach the parents not, would you rather have a live daughter than a dead son, but let's explore what's going on with your kid and see if we can get to the bottom of whatever is happening. And then how can we support you in whatever it is that you believe is going to be the best course for your children? Because no one is going to know the children better than the parents. Our parents are the front line of defense that are willing to sacrifice not only themselves, but anything else you can think of. They are who we need to be supporting and helping to navigate through this, not saying if your parents don't accept your new identity, they're not safe. That is alienating children from the most important people in their lives.
Yeah, that's I mean, certainly like the would you rather have a live daughter or a dead son? It's just blatantly emotional manipulation. But there's also this element of like scaremongering about just life in general. Like there's threats around every corner, and you have to beware of your parents because they might not be affirming, which means, they're not an ally, they're not on your side, they're out to get you. And we have, skyrocketing rates of anxiety, and we're confused as to where it's coming from.
Right. Well, I think people are finally cluing in and understanding that it's coming from social media and giving, I'm Generation X. So we didn't grow up with all these electronics and technology. I mean, I didn't even have a computer till I was in high school, or internet until I was in college. And it was dial up. It was slow. Like no one used it. We certainly didn't have cell phones like we do now. It was analog. I had 30 minutes a month. Well, so we don't know what we don't know. As my friends all have kids that are older because I started late in life. Their kids are getting these devices and having access to all the things. And we just didn't know what we didn't know. And children are accessing information that their brains are just not cognitively, developmentally capable of processing. And this is what's really sick is now we know they're not capable of processing this information. And yet the libraries are taking it over and putting this propaganda in the hands of small children without the consent of adults. And we know that when children are exposed to things at too young of an age, that is not a major trauma like abuse, physical, sexual abuse, but it is a trauma, and they're not able to process these things, and they're starting to have questions they shouldn't have at such a young age. And who do they go to? They may not know how to articulate what they've just been exposed to or read or seen. And so they end up suffering in isolation. And it's a shame that our culture believes that these books are appropriate to print and put into these libraries. Now we know to restrict access to social media, but how do you impose that in the libraries? You have to people that are willing to get in and activate a recourse and a front line of defense to make sure those books are out of the hands of children.
Are you familiar with any of Jonathan Haidt's work on social media?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think he's spot on. I think that we've got to make sure that children are not accessing any of these things at a young age. And we know that it's going to have the most impact on females. Why? Females are much more involved in vanity, makeup, hair. I mean, look at all the products that girls are going to use. And so if we're getting online and then we've got all the airbrush and all the different filters. And so is this really what the person looks like? The picture that they're posting online? Is it a version of them? Yes, but is that really what they look like? And so we're exacerbating that insecurity for girls, making it way worse. And then I've had clients that have come in and like Ask FM is one of the original ones that I heard about where people post anonymously and there people are posting things like, I hope you kill yourself, or nobody wants to be around you. Why don't you kill yourself? And I'm thinking, first of all, why would anybody say that? But second of all, why is a 12-year-old accessing these platforms? So I would have to talk to the parents and say, hey, look, here's the problem. One of the problems, we've got kids getting into these things. Your kids are reading things that are being posted about them from people anonymously. They have no idea who's saying it. And you don't even know who to go to talk to parents and say, hey, these are things that your children are saying. You need to work with your child because no one should be saying anything like that ever. But yeah, so when I was growing up, we had magazines and some commercials, but I mean, we didn't have cable growing up, so I only had 3 channels, and everybody wanted to look like the models you see in the magazines or on the commercials of those 3 channels. So we knew then that there was an issue with image, and this is where we had a huge outbreak in anorexia and bulimia in the 90s. But now we've got it all over the place. It's literally everywhere in the hands of our children at times that we don't even know that they have those devices in their hands.
That's scary. What do you think is the origin of how, when we talk specifically about the trans issue, what do you think is the origin of how the therapy profession kind of went off the rails a bit?
Or well, probably when at conception of our field.
Really? So all the way back?
Probably, I don't know. I mean,
Wow.
some of the original folks, like Freud, I mean, he did enough cocaine to kill a horse, and everything was oriented on sex and children being attracted to their parents, and like what chaos and lunacy we have based so many things in our field off of. And I do believe there is a lot of validity in the work that we do with certain populations, drugs and alcohol, major trauma, sexual abused victims, children in foster care. Like these are populations that are in dire need of support from a mental health professional that's not going to push any kind of ideology, but really be centered on truth in a very loving way to help children work through the things or adults to work through the things that they're experiencing. But back to big pharma. I mean, look at the DSM and how it's come about. We've gone from, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 different diagnoses to how many do we have now in the DSM? And it and the checklist, there's Soad Tabrizi, who's on social media. She wrote an article talking about how they come up with a checklist. If they don't have an agreement whenever they're sitting in their big circle to come up with the different diagnoses and the checklist, then they take a vote. There's no empirical data. There's no studies run with control groups. No, they just take a vote. And that's how they basically break down the checklist for diagnosing somebody with one of their fake diagnoses in the big Bible for mental health.
When I started my psych undergrad, then moved into the master's of counseling program, and it seemed like the DSM was this just incredibly like high and holy, like ultra scientific, document, this giant book. It's a huge, thick book, and you think you hold it with such reverence, and then you kind of realize how it's put together, and you just like, it's such a letdown.
Yeah.
It could almost make you lose faith in the field.
100% agree. I actually stopped using the DSM because at this point in my career, I don't bill insurance. And so I don't have to give a diagnosis. And that's one of the other conundrums. You have to have a diagnosis in order to bill insurance. That's scary. But it was probably, I would say maybe Well, probably in 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, I totally stopped using it because I lost all faith in it. I've got 12-year-olds walking into my office taking 15 different pharmaceutical medications. That's a problem for me. And most of the meds that they're prescribed are psychotropic and not indicated for under age 18. So why do we have 12-year-olds, 8-year-olds taking these hardcore drugs that we really don't know the long-term impact for, especially for children taking them? Because they're all, I mean, they're not as new now, but they're relatively new. So what are we doing? And then trying to pin down, like, why does everybody have to have a diagnosis? Sometimes life sucks. And that would be my diagnosis. Life really sucks. Sometimes it's hard. It's not easy. Things don't go according to plan. People are not loving and trustworthy all the time. You don't have a clinical diagnosis. You have something called life happens. Crap happens.
Wow, yeah. It seems like another element of this is there's people just yearning for some kind of identity. I have ADHD, I have autism, or I'm on the spectrum. There's kind of like a bit of a cachet, especially in younger, like Gen Z type people. There's a certain social capital that comes from having a diagnosis, and it seems like young people so desperate to find out who they are. And they're like, the DSM has given me, some kind of identity.
I agree with that. I think that they really fall back onto this DSM, like they want something to be wrong with them. But we've seen this hike of anxiety and depression, and I do believe it is correlated to the access to social media and internet and all the things on these devices. And I think, what is it, like 40% of Gen Z identifies with some type of mental health issue? Well,
Mm.
we've also kept them so shielded from things like in the real world. Instead of go outside and play, go get dirty. Like, God gave you the best gifts in the world, and it doesn't matter if you break them or put them, it just makes more if you break them. Sticks, rocks, dirt, like those are God's gifts for you. Get out there, go play. You don't need to be sitting inside watching TV or playing on your devices. You need to learn how to interact with other kids. You need to be able to explore this world. You need to be able to see how independent you can be. From the moment your child is born, exits the womb, they are working on becoming more and more independent. So why would we not help to exacerbate those skills to help our children flourish in independence? They need to find tasks that they can do. Like my 10-year-old, we redid his room and I let him put his nightstands together. And the sense of accomplishment that he experienced from doing that by himself, like I was there if he needed it, but I didn't force myself to help him. I only was available if he asked for help. We have to teach our kids how to ask for help, and we're not doing that.
Wow. Yeah. It seems like a big part of Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's Coddling of the American Mind. I think one of their sayings was prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child, something like that. It seems like when you look at college campuses and these just epic meltdowns, if a professor assigns Shakespeare or if there's a conservative speaker who comes onto campus, and it just looks like a life and death, absolute crisis event. Part of me thinks like a few skinned knees in childhood could have, given some resilience to what you're experiencing right now. Do you see that?
Right, right. Good grief, yes. And it's not just isolated with college students. We're even talking about some young parents that I work with that are saying, well, because I tell them, look, y'all are divorced for a reason, but y'all have children. And so the moment you brought that baby, your greatest blessing, into this world, you at that moment took a silent oath to sacrifice anything to give them everything. So you have to have thick skin. You have to, because your kids are going to say things that are going to hurt your feelings. You may feel like they're choosing the other parent over you, but never is a child going to choose to love one parent over the other unless they are coerced into that. But children recognize and know that they need both parents. So how do we cultivate that child being able to love both parents? But whenever I say you need to have thick skin and you have to be willing to make some sacrifices, because we have no problem identifying the sacrifice. If my child were in an ice cold stream, would you jump in and save your child? If my child were diagnosed with something that had to have life-saving intervention, would you sell everything? Like, these are no-brainers. But if my child is going through something emotionally, mentally, psychologically, whatever, to what extent are you willing to make those sacrifices, even if it's with your co-parent? And the co-parents are like, I don't think I should have to have thicker skin, or why should I have to sacrifice myself? Because you're the parent and your child is dependent upon you to, especially when they're little bitty, to make sure that they are safe, fed, have their roof over their head, they have a bed to sleep in. They need you for those things. As they get older, that's as when we start to teach that independence, but you have to make sacrifices even when they're teenagers to make sure they have the tools that they need so they can become independent. So you're going to be sacrificing for the rest of your life. If you don't like that, well, you can't turn back now because here you are with your greatest blessing. So sometimes I just can't get that through their heads that you have to make these sacrifices for children and concurrently teach them independence.
So we have a declining birth rate in this country, and I think a lot of it is people who are either delaying having kids or like, I don't want to have kids because they seem like an inconvenience. And I feel like historically, other than faith in God, like one of the probably the biggest source of meaning and purpose in people's lives is having kids and having a family. How do you see people's psyche shifting from this idea of long-term meaning and purpose to short-term, like having fun and not having this extra responsibility?
If who is it, Mother Teresa, that said, if you want to change the world, go home and be with your children. I think that children are experiencing so much discomfort and they don't know how to be comfortable or accepting of that discomfort or the conflict in life, or they've got too much going on and they don't want to ever make their children experience something like what they've experienced. And that's what I see over and over again. When I'm working with the high conflict divorce and custody modification cases, the children in those cases very frequently say, I don't ever want to have kids because I don't want to ever risk putting my children through this. Versus the foster kid, when I'm working with them, all they want is to have a kid because they yearn so deeply to have that connection and relationship that they've never experienced. They are craving that kind of attachment with somebody, anybody. And so that's why they want children. But the declining population, I think that we have unfortunately created a generation of entitled individuals. And I talk about with parents, we are teeter-tottering on this very fine line of I want to make sure that my children know that I'm loved, they're loved, but I don't want to make them entitled. So how do you navigate that path? And I think that we have failed. I think the next generation, Generation Alpha, is going to be very different because I think the millennials have learned from the mistakes that we've made from Generation X in raising our kids because we just didn't know what we didn't know with the technology. So I think you're going to see a generation that's more conservative and more family oriented with Generation Alpha.
I'm wondering what you see in terms of the gender wars. It seems like there's a rise in recent years in men and women hating each other, antagonism. You've got kind of radical feminism. You've got kind of red pill on the other side where it's like really just a resentment towards the opposite sex. Are you seeing that and how is it playing out?
I think that you've got your polar ends. I think the bell curve is kind of flattened out, and you've got these two very opposite approaches to life. The feminist movement started back in the 60s and 70s, and in the I think it was 1970, 1972, when Gloria Allred started suing the pharmacy stores for having aisles with gender toys, boys and girls toys separated. And then we saw uprisings of these over the years, but it was always suppressed and pushed back down, and they were never able to really get their foot in the door. Some notable changes are when we had the whole community, whole children, whatever, all the community health clinics getting into the schools, and parents were unknowingly, blindly signing for consent for these folks to talk with our children. And we didn't even know that they were having these discussions with our children about gender and sex and at what ages. And I think that was the start of it. That was in like 2007, 2008 is when that really started to take off, but we didn't know about it. And then there was another point in time with the COVID pandemic where people were at home and social media was just exploding. So I think we had this foundational thing that was just growing in momentum, and then the pandemic exacerbated it to a level that we weren't able to put the lid back on it and suppress it back down. So I think the feminist movement has turned into something that is no longer the feminist movement. But there is a great book. I can't think of the author's name, but it's Don't Let Your Daughters Grow Up to Be Feminists. It's a really good book talking about if this is really what you wanted, then you want equality from the top and the bottom. And men are overrepresented at the top. We know that. And there's reasons why. And it talks about some of those things. but they're also overrepresented at the bottom with homelessness and suicide rates. And is that really what you want, is equality from the top to the bottom? Or do you only want equality at the top?
Mm.
About or think about and talk with your children about. But the feminist movement has evolved. I don't think it's necessarily the feminist movement anymore. I think it is this very divisive culture that you're talking about, not just with male versus female, but also with the color of our skin. It's happening. And I think that the majority of people don't agree with it, and they're now finding their voice and getting more comfortable to speak up and out because they are not scared of the cancel culture anymore. So I think it's going to get better. And I think as Generation Alpha starts to get older, I think they're going to be very bold and emboldened to stand up to this nonsense.
So you mentioned color of the skin. I'm wondering what you see in regards to race within the mental health fields. I see a lot talking about we need to deconstruct whiteness and decenter whiteness and all this stuff. And I honestly don't know what that has to do with like a one-on-one relationship in the therapy office, but it's apparently a big deal in our field. So I'm wondering what you're seeing.
The privilege walk is one of the things, like, that never existed whenever I was working on my master's or my PhD. I'd never heard of this. And so when I first saw it, I'm thinking, this is disgusting. Like, why are you trying to single out people that their parents are married still to this day, or parents are not struggling with poverty, or, all the things that are listed on this privilege walk? It is nauseating how they're trying to single people out. I think it's absurd. I think that we need to be able to find a way to connect with people based on what they're sharing with us, not the color of their skin, not the gender that they were born into, assigned at birth, believe they are. Just be with your client, talk with your client, understand their situation, and help them explore it so they can gain insight into who they are and what they're doing, how they're projecting themselves into this world. And if they don't align, let's help them find some congruency. That doesn't mean affirmative therapy. That means if this is how you see yourself, how are you exploring this in the world? How do people perceive you? And is that really how you want people to perceive you?
What's your preferred modality or theory of counseling?
Well, so if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I probably would have given you a much more technical, therapeutic framework here. But my answer to that with everybody is love and truth. If you're able to stay rooted in truth and show love towards the people that you're working with, then I think you're going to be able to uncover things, but you have to stay rooted in truth and love. The Bible, which is really the greatest book that we should all be living by, is love. That's everything in that book is about love and how do you sacrifice? How do you help others? Service. It's about taking care of other people, sacrificing yourself to serve others, fellowship. So love and truth. Those are my two foundational building blocks.
I love that. I love that. How do you see religion, specifically Christianity, being addressed or embraced in the field? Because one thing I see is it's generally not like, I don't see people openly hostile to it, but it's kind of just generally assumed a lot of times that Christianity is something backwards, that the ideal thing would be to move your client beyond that, to kind of evolve beyond it. I'm wondering if you see any of that.
Yes, and I treat religious trauma, or how do you like that with your sky father? I'm so sick of hearing these things. It's just rude. It's very disrespectful rhetoric. You don't want for Christians to talk about the things that you believe in that regard. So why are you talking about anything related to Christianity like that? This is a country founded on Christian beliefs. Our Constitution is founded on Christian beliefs. Our pledges, everything is founded within Christianity. You cannot have liberty without Christian morals. So Christianity within our field, I've been referencing Christian beliefs since day one. And if my client professes to have an issue with God, I say, well, I hear what you're saying. These are still really great things to practice. Saying God bothers you, just take God's name out of it and still practice it. Prayer. Prayer is one of the best ways to develop internal dialogue. What are you doing? You're saying, this is my problem. I need help. And here's something I'm grateful for. So that's how I teach prayer. And if they don't like for me to call it prayer, then we just call it internal dialogue. But every single thing within Christianity, I mean, Proverbs is my favorite book in the Bible, and it's all about psychology, basic things related to psychology. So if somebody has a problem with the word God, they're a different religion, that's perfectly fine. They can take the word God out or anything related to a word of Christianity, but everything in the Bible is still relevant to what we're doing. And we're actually doing it. I think people just don't realize it. So to sit there and bash Christianity or call us Christian nationalists or whatever ugly rhetoric they have, I think that they are projecting onto others the behaviors that they're actually engaging in.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I love so much of that. I read Proverbs probably a month ago, and it was amazing just how much wisdom for daily life there is. I mean, even just like how to manage your money, just really like concrete, wisdom advice for just living is really neat. So I think that's amazing that you apply that to therapy.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, do you see like in professional organizations or in like therapy networking groups or social media groups, like discrimination against Christians?
Well, when I was allowed to be in the groups, yes. And what's really funny is that I never said anything. I never posted. I never commented on anything. I just was a fly on the wall because I wanted to understand really where is our field going right now. And it was so ugly. So I'm not upset that I'm kicked out because it was very, very disheartening to read the things that they're saying. But oh yes, they bash Christians, and there are some Christians that I think were starting to speak up. But by and large, people in the therapeutic or in the mental health world bash Christianity.
So I think I'm trying to remember the poll, but in terms of like regular religious attendance, like church attendance or something like that, we crossed below the 50% threshold a few years ago. So we're becoming a much less religious country. Like you said earlier, our country was founded on Christianity, and really for a very long time, like God is the centerpiece of society, the family, the individual, like the highest source of meaning. That's been true of us for a long time. And we've kind of stripped that out of things. And, how do you see like a post-religion society where, TikTok has replaced church and like the glorification of self has replaced God? How do you see our society navigating that from a mental health perspective?
Well, okay, so prayer was taken out of schools in 1962, and we've seen this gross decline of morals and behaviors since then. And now we're at like an all-time low. I think if we're not already at rock bottom, I think we're close to rock bottom. And some of the newer statistics show that we've had a huge increase in people returning to churches, the revivals across the country, the younger generation being more conservative and more faith-based than the millennials or Generation Z. I think that our culture in America is going to redirect and correct itself. And I think that the mental health field is either going to have to jump on board um, or see the huge decline in the field, because I think people are sick and tired of this nonsense and getting in between children and their parents. People are sick and tired of the alienating behaviors.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Man, it's such an interesting time that we live in. Yeah, I feel like this decline in Christianity and spirituality and family and kind of breakdown of community. There's so many things going on that's leaving people isolated. Then you jump on social media and you get twisted up in these kind of mass hysterias, and then you might find identity through diagnosis. There's just like a number of things going on. We're being attacked from so many different angles. Like, I don't know, it's hard for me to conceptualize that.
Yeah. I think that people are also cluing into and having more awareness and knowledge about the echo chambers and all of the bots. So, like all the different platforms that you can get on with Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, 1,800 other ones. But people have created those bots. And so one person says something and they get attacked by 200 different bots with all this ugly rhetoric on the other side in opposition. But people, I think, are really starting to clue into that and understand that they're not even real people that are echoing this. And so where we thought it was the majority of people saying these awful things, now we're recognizing that it's like such a small percentage. And so it's time to shut them down.
Yeah, yeah. I also want to say you talked about, you've seen revival, and that's definitely been true at my church here in Austin, Texas. where, I mean, there's a lot of Sundays where we're pulling every chair in the church, like including office chairs of the pastors, so that people can have a place to sit to watch the sermon. I
That's
mean,
awesome.
it's amazing how, like, this revival that we're seeing. So I'm completely in agreement with that. What advice would you give to someone like me who's just, getting through Masters of Counseling program, just coming out of school, starting this profession? What advice would you give to someone like me, as a new therapist?
First thing is to find a supervisor that is not going to be aligned with the far left progressive ideologies. Find somebody that has similar values and beliefs as you, conservative, if that's where you are, or moderate, whichever. But that's the first thing, because they're going to also make sure that you are practicing ethically. Know the difference between what's codified in law for us to practice ethically versus best practice from the code of ethics from like the ACA. Because the ACA best practice code of ethics is not codified in law for our licensure. Um, so those would probably be the two top things that I would say. And then the third thing I would say, don't shut yourself off from any particular population of people. Be willing to explore anything and everything. You might have an idea of what you want to get into for your specialty, but never sell yourself short, because you never know what door God is going to open. And if you're willing to walk into it, you might find something very meaningful and purposeful beyond that threshold.
I love that. I love that. So if you could wave a magic wand, how would you fix the therapy profession?
I don't know if I should answer that. No, I would probably burn it to the ground and start over.
Oh, that bad.
I think where we are, it is a terrible place. So I actually worked on legislation, 3 different bills, one for foster care, one to make it illegal to practice social transitioning, but it would be a civil liability imposed upon the people that are secretly and intentionally assisting a minor child to transition. And the third one, which has not gained any traction, we'll focus on that one in the next legislative session in 2027. But the third one is for reform in our field to enforce that mental health, all licensures, all different facets, teach something other than just affirmative therapy. We do need some reform. We need to get out of this ideological, cult-based therapeutic approach. We've got to steer away from the queer culture because it's trying to normalize all these deviant behaviors, and that's just not okay.
Wow. Final question for you. When you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
How corrupt mental health is. I think people don't realize, even legislators, very conservative Christian legislators, are still stating that people need to take their children to therapy, or adults need to get into therapy. And since the last legislative session, I'm sitting there watching some of these debates and I'm thinking, Lord, no, you're sending these children to the lap of the devil, because you've got to think where that mental health professional is coming from and the ideologies that they're imposing on your children, and what is the damage that's being done. And if Abigail Schreier talks about bad therapy, if you're taking your kids or you're going yourself to therapy for what I call basic everyday problems, then there is a good chance they are planting seeds to generate false narratives or false memories. I mean, creating problems where problems didn't exist. Those are the people that need to be referred out to go talk to their pastor, or get into a group where there's going to be some healthy dialogue for them to heal. But we need to be talking about how corrupt mental health is.
I love that answer. And, I think it's right over there, Abigail Schreier's Bad Therapy. I loved the book. One thing I think she missed, though, is there's also such a thing as good therapy. There's people like you out there. But what I think is really difficult for me is I'll hear people say, you should go see a therapist. And it's like, a therapist doesn't really mean much. I could be seeing someone like you who's, using a combination of CBT and biblical principles, and you have like love and competence and you have a lot of experience. Or it could be someone who, is encouraging your child to transition and they're using healing crystals. Like, you have no clue what you're getting if you see a therapist.
That's right. That's right. So I did start a website several years ago. It's called grassrootstherapists.com. It's with an S on the end of therapist.com. And it's not a business. It's not anything. It's just a website to be a resource. And it's got the two bills on it. But I started it years ago to help parents understand what the different mental health professionals are, the licensing, where their boards are, how to file those complaints, so on and so forth, but also to ask them questions about their basic approaches. Because if I'm taking my greatest blessing, my children, that God has put on loan to me to see somebody, and they are going to corrupt my child, I'm coming after you.
Mm.
So know what you're about to get yourself into as you take your children to these people, because somebody that's saying a 3-year-old is transgender has lost their marbles and should not be taking your children to somebody like that. They are
No.
your children to have so much dysfunction and trauma throughout their lives, and you need to run like your hair is on fire.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like a lot of these therapists need more help than their clients do.
Amen. Well, that's a great point. Our field is built on psychosis.
Mm.
So unfortunately, it attracts a lot of what I call wounded helpers that have not truly healed their wounds. And so they think that they're doing okay and they want to get in and help others. That's great. But if you're a wounded helper and using your story to navigate your client's journey, you're cheating. You're trying to
Mm.
build rapport in a very fake way. That's not a professional.
I love that. And I love this conversation. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me. I would love to have this conversation again anytime.
Likewise. Yeah, let's do it anytime.